Bulls Show daily podcast by In40U.
All right, so get this. South Africa is changing up their tourism game. They're aiming for more travelers from China and India. We're going to dive into this article from BRICS IN4U. It's a website all about the BRICS economic bloc. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa.
Yeah, and what's interesting is why now? It's a pretty big move, especially since they're making it easier for these particular travelers to visit, easier than for some of their, traditional allies.
It's true. It is a bit of a head-scratcher. Think about it. Visitors from the U.S. and U.K. can just go to South Africa without a visa for short stays. But people from China and India, even though they're part of BRICS, have to go through all this pre-authorization stuff. Kind of a mixed message, don't you think?
Yeah, it seems kind of counterintuitive at first, but when you look at the actual numbers, it starts to make a bit more sense. South Africa only saw 37,000 tourists from China and 80,000 from India in 2023. Compare that to the almost 350,000 they got from both the U.S. and the U.K., you can see they're missing out on a huge potential market.
Okay, so they want to tap into this big pool of tourists. But how? How are they going to do it? The article mentions something called a trusted tour operator system.
Right. It's basically a network of travel agents. They vouch for their clients, and it simplifies the visa process. They're launching it in January to streamline travel authorization, specifically for Chinese and Indian tourists.
So they're getting rid of the visa hurdles, making it easier to visit. Have other countries done this?
Oh yeah, definitely not a new idea. Thailand, Peru, and Morocco have done similar things to attract Indian tourists, and they've had a lot of success. Even Saudi Arabia has a special stopover visa for Indian travelers on long flights.
Interesting. So South Africa is using a proven strategy. But this trusted tour operator system sounds a bit complicated. How does it actually work?
Well, it's all about building trust.
Yeah.
And streamlining the process. So South Africa partners with certain tour operators, ones with a good track record and who meet specific criteria. These operators then have to make sure their clients meet all the travel requirements, including visa applications.
So it's like a stamp of approval, which makes it easier for South Africa to manage all the tourists and make sure things run smoothly.
Exactly. And for the tour operators, it's a chance to grow their businesses and tap into a new market. But there are risks too. They have to be careful to keep their trusted status. Any issues with their clients could jeopardize their partnership with South Africa.
I see. But let's talk bigger picture for a sec. Why is South Africa doing this now? Is it just about money?
Well, helping the economy is a big part of it. Tourism is a big chunk of their GDP, and they see bringing in tourists from these two booming economies as a way to bring in a lot of cash into different areas.
Right. More tourists means more spending on hotels, restaurants, transportation, tours, souvenirs,
Yeah,
the whole 9 yards.
exactly. And on top of the economic benefits, it also helps address the skills shortage in their tourism sector. All these new tourists could create a ton of new jobs, which would give opportunities to locals and potentially bring in skilled workers from other countries.
So we're talking job creation, economic growth, and tackling a skills shortage. Sounds like they're betting big on this strategy to revive their tourism industry and boost the whole economy.
And it goes deeper than that. This isn't just a one-off thing. It's part of a bigger push by Home Affairs Minister Leon Schreiber to completely change South Africa's approach to migration. He's really into attracting global talent, and he sees tourism as a key part of that.
So this is about more than just getting tourists. It's about positioning South Africa as a welcoming place for people from all over, whether they're coming for a vacation or to build a career.
Yeah, exactly. It's about changing perceptions, showing the world that South Africa is open for business and ready to engage on a global scale. And tourism is a powerful way to do that.
This is where it gets really interesting for me. I'm curious about the potential long-term effects of this shift. Could focusing on tourism from China and India change their relationships with Western countries?
That's a great question. It's something to think about. If South Africa sees big economic wins from this, it could lead them to prioritize those relationships and maybe shift away from some of their traditional alliances with Western countries.
Like they're diversifying their portfolio, not just in terms of tourists, but also in their international relations.
Right. And that could have ripple effects across the region and beyond. It could signal a shift in global power, with BRICS nations playing a much bigger role.
Hold on a second. Before we go too far down that road, let's bring it back to South Africa. What does Home Affairs Minister Schreiber have to say about all this? I mean, he's the one leading these changes.
Well, he's been pretty clear about his vision for South Africa's future. In the article, he says, tourism is one of South Africa's natural advantages. It's one of the things we should be excelling at. That really shows how ambitious they are and how much they believe in tourism as a key driver of growth.
He's right about the natural advantages. South Africa is a beautiful country with so much to offer. But getting tourists is just one part of the equation. What about the cultural and social impacts? Bringing in a ton of people from different cultures could lead to some interesting dynamics.
Absolutely. You're right. That's a really important aspect that we can't ignore. This strategy could change South Africa's social fabric, creating opportunities for cultural exchange and understanding, but also potentially causing some tensions and challenges.
So it's not all perfect. There are serious implications to consider. But before we get into those, let's just quickly recap what we've learned. We know that South Africa is trying to attract more tourists from China and India, mainly because of economic reasons and to deal with a skills shortage. They're using this trusted tour operator system to make the visa process easier, following the lead of other countries that have had success with similar approaches.
And we talked about the bigger picture, how this fits into South Africa's overall migration policy, and the possibility that it could signal a change in global power dynamics.
Exactly. We've covered a lot, but there's still more to unpack. Let's dive deeper into the potential cultural and social impacts of this strategy and explore what it could mean for South Africa's future.
I'm ready when you are. Let's go. Hashtag TTS, the Deep Dive, episode 2024, 1101, part 2 of 3.
It's a weird, kind of like a double-edged sword, isn't it? This wave of tourists could lead to a more, vibrant and diverse culture.
Yeah.
But it could also cause friction, especially if people feel like resources are being stretched thin or like their cultural identity is being watered down.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. On one hand, you want to be open and embrace the economic and cultural perks that come with tourism, but you also have to be careful about the downsides and make sure you're managing those responsibly.
And that's the tough part. South Africa's got to be proactive in encouraging cross-cultural conversations and understanding. They need to make sure the tourism benefits are spread fairly and reduce any negative effects on local communities and the environment.
How do they do that? I mean, it's easy to talk about being responsible, but how do they actually walk the walk? It's true. It takes a multi-pronged approach. Investing in cultural sensitivity training for people in the tourism industry is huge. They're the ones interacting with these new tourists. So giving them the tools to handle cultural differences and encourage respectful interactions is key.
That makes sense. But it can't just be about training the tourism industry. What about the local communities who are directly impacted by this wave of tourists?
Right. That's where community outreach and engagement come in. It's essential to involve local communities in the planning and decision-making. Make sure their voices are heard and their concerns are addressed.
It's about making sure everyone feels included in the solution, not just dealing with the consequences.
Exactly. And we can't forget about the environment. Sustainable tourism practices need to be a top priority to protect South Africa's amazing natural beauty. Things like protecting wildlife habitats, managing waste properly, and promoting eco-friendly transportation.
It's all about finding that balance where economic growth, cultural exchange, and environmental protection all work together.
Right, and it's not just about checking boxes and putting policies in place. It's about a change in mindset, both within the tourism industry and in South African society as a whole.
It's a big ask. Do you think South Africa can handle it? They have complicated history, and they're still struggling with inequality and social divisions.
It's definitely a challenge, but I'm cautiously optimistic. There's a growing awareness of the need for sustainable and inclusive tourism, and there are inspiring examples of communities and organizations working together to achieve that.
Okay, so let's say everything works out. South Africa successfully rolls out this tourism strategy. They manage the cultural and social impacts well, and the economy gets a boost. What's next? What are the long-term implications?
That's where things get really interesting. If this works, it could ripple out across the region and even globally. Other countries, especially those in BRICS, might try similar things, which could change global tourism patterns.
So instead of Western countries dominating tourism, we could see a rise in travel between emerging economies, especially within BRICS.
Exactly. And that could have a big impact on how global power dynamics play out. It could lead to a world with multiple power centers, where economic and cultural influence are more balanced.
Well, it's incredible to think that something like attracting more tourists could have such far-reaching effects. But let's not get carried away. It's still early days. There's no guarantee that this will go exactly as South Africa plans.
You're right. There are always unexpected challenges and twists and turns. But one thing's for sure, this is a bold move by South Africa, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out.
So we've talked about the potential cultural and social impacts, the environmental factors, and the global implications. But let's not ignore the elephant in the room, xenophobia. South Africa, unfortunately, has a history of xenophobic violence, often targeted at immigrants from other African countries. Could this wave of tourists from China and India make those tensions worse?
That's a tough one. And it's important to acknowledge that xenophobia is a complex issue, with deep roots in South Africa's history. But it's crucial to avoid making sweeping judgments.
Right, it's not fair to stereotype an entire population.
Exactly. Most South Africans are welcoming and hospitable. And it's worth noting that this strategy is specifically targeting tourists, not immigrants.
That's an important distinction. Tourists are there for a short time and are seen as helping the economy, while immigrants are often seen as competition for jobs and resources.
Exactly. And the government knows that xenophobic feelings could come up, so they need to address those concerns proactively and promote tolerance and understanding.
What can they do to lower that risk? I mean, it's one thing to say they'll be proactive, but what does that actually mean?
Well, it starts with clear communication. The government has to be upfront about the goals of this tourism plan, highlighting the economic benefits and the value of cultural exchange. They also need to directly address concerns about job security and resource allocation, making sure locals feel like they're benefiting from the influx of tourists.
It's about making sure everyone feels like they're winning, not left behind or pushed out.
Exactly. And beyond just talking about it, there needs to be a real effort to promote intercultural dialogue and understanding. This could mean educational programs in schools, community events that bring people from different backgrounds together, and media campaigns that challenge xenophobic stereotypes.
It's about creating chances for people to connect with each other, break down walls, and realize they have more in common than they might think.
Right. And law enforcement plays a role too. The government needs to make it clear that xenophobic violence won't be tolerated, and they need to make sure the police are trained to handle these situations sensitively.
So it's a multi-pronged approach: communication, education, community involvement, and law enforcement, all working together to create a more inclusive and welcoming environment.
Exactly. It's a complicated challenge, but South Africa has to deal with it if they want this tourism plan to work in the long run.
I gotta say, this has really opened my eyes to the complexities of tourism. It's not just about beaches and safaris. It's about cultural exchange, economic development, social dynamics, and even global power shifts.
It's a fascinating way to look at the world. And as we've seen, even something like attracting more tourists can have ripple effects that go way beyond national borders.
So where do we go from here? What's the next chapter in this story? What should we be watching for as this strategy unfolds?
Well, I think it's crucial to see how this trusted tour operator system actually works and whether it delivers what it promises. We also need to keep an eye on the cultural and social dynamics, looking for signs of both positive integration and potential conflicts. And of course, we'll be watching the economic impact to see if this influx of tourists actually leads to real benefits for South Africa.
Sounds like there's a lot to keep track of.
There is. And remember, this is just one piece of a much bigger picture. South Africa is facing tons of challenges, from poverty and inequality to climate change and political instability. But if managed well, this tourism strategy could be a positive force, helping to create a more prosperous, inclusive, and sustainable future for the country.
Okay, we've covered a lot, but there's one more important part of this story. We need to talk about the role of BRICS.
Oh, yeah. This isn't just about South Africa. It's about the growing influence of the BRICS nations on the world stage.
So let's get into that. What's the connection between South Africa's new tourism plan and the overall BRICS agenda?
Well, remember that BRICS is all about cooperation and economic development among its members. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And tourism is a big part of that.
Okay, I'm starting to see the link. But for our listeners, how does attracting tourists from China and India specifically relate to the BRICS agenda?
It strengthens those economic and cultural ties within the group. It's like South Africa is saying, hey, we're open for business and we're happy to have you. And that message resonates not just with tourists, but with potential investors and business partners from those countries.
So it's a way for South Africa to solidify its place in BRICS and use those relationships to benefit everyone.
Exactly. And it fits perfectly with the overall goals of BRICS, promoting trade investment and cultural exchange between its members.
So this tourism strategy isn't just about getting visitors. It's about strengthening alliances and building a more powerful economic bloc that can challenge the West.
Exactly. And that's why this is such a big deal. It's not just about tourism. It's about how the global landscape is changing and the rise of new power centers.
Wow, this deep dive has taken us on quite a ride. We started talking about visas and tour operators, and now we're talking about global power struggles and the future of the world.
It just shows how interconnected everything is and how important it is to stay informed and understand what's shaping our world.
Absolutely. So what does all this mean for the everyday traveler? How could this shift in tourism patterns affect their experiences?
That's a great question. And it leads us perfectly into our final thoughts on this fascinating topic. Hashtag TTS, the Deep Dive episode 2024-1101, part 3 of 3.
Picture this. You're planning a big trip, and instead of automatically thinking Paris or New York, you're checking out flights to Cape Town or Mumbai. Could that be the new normal?
It's definitely possible. As BRICS countries get more economic power and make travel easier within their group, we could see a big change in global tourism. Think about the ripple effects.
I'm listening. What kind of changes are we talking about?
Well, first off, the tourism industry would have to adjust. There'd be a huge demand for tour guides, translators, and cultural experts, people specializing in BRICS destinations, hotels, restaurants, airlines. They'd all have to cater to the specific needs and preferences of these new travelers. It'd be a whole different game.
So beyond the logistics, how would this change the traveler's experience? What makes exploring a BRICS destination special?
Well, these are countries with such rich histories, diverse cultures, and stunning landscapes that often get overlooked by the typical Western tourist routes. Exploring a BRICS country gives you a chance to go off the beaten path and experience something truly authentic and unexpected.
It's about immersing yourself in a different way of life, seeing new perspectives and broadening your horizons.
Exactly. And for travelers from BRICS countries themselves, it's about exploring their shared heritage and strengthening those cultural bonds. It's a chance to connect with people who have similar histories and experiences, even if they're from different countries.
So it's not just about the place, it's about the people you meet.
Absolutely. That's the real magic of travel. Those human connections, the shared moments of laughter and discovery that go beyond borders and cultures.
It's about realizing that even with our differences, we're all part of the same human family. So we've talked about the impact on the tourism industry, the unique experiences that BRICS destinations offer, and the cultural exchange that this shift could bring. But what about the economic side of things? How could this change in tourism affect the global economy?
It could be huge. As tourist money flows into BRICS countries, it would boost their economies, create jobs, and improve local communities. This could lead to more investment in things like infrastructure, education, and healthcare, further improving people's lives in those countries.
So it's not just about tourism revenue. It's about creating a positive ripple effect that benefits everyone.
Exactly. And as BRICS nations become economically stronger, it could shift the balance of global trade and investment, maybe even leading to a more multipolar world where wealth and power are more evenly distributed.
It's like a rising tide lifts all boats.
I like that analogy. And don't forget about the potential for innovation and new businesses. As tourism grows in BRICS nations, it'll create opportunities for new businesses to pop up, catering to these travelers and showing off the unique products and services these countries offer.
So it's not just about hotels and tour companies. It's about encouraging creativity, fostering entrepreneurship, and diversifying economy.
Exactly. It's about unleashing the potential of these emerging economies and letting them take their place on the world stage.
All right, we've covered a lot today. From South Africa's new tourism strategy to the intricacies of cultural exchange and sustainable tourism. And now we've zoomed out to think about the bigger picture, how this could reshape global tourism. But before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question. What if this isn't just a passing trend, but a fundamental shift in how we travel and experience the world? What if, in the future, exploring BRICS countries becomes the go-to choice for travelers looking for authentic, enriching, and life-changing experiences?
It's a great question to think about, and it reminds us that the world is always changing, and we need to be open to new possibilities and challenge our ideas about how things should be.
Well said. And that's the beauty of the deep dive. It's about exploring the unknown, asking tough questions, and expanding our understanding of the world.
It's about sparking curiosity, inspiring deeper thought, and helping our listeners become more informed and engaged global citizens.
And on that note, we've come to the end of our deep dive. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration. Until then, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.